at WUR, Living Within the Planetary Boundaries, the conference that we are going to hold from the 6th until the 8th of December this year. If all goes well under the circumstances of COVID-19. This second webinar is about economy and partnerships, so the economic perspectives and governance of transitions in the circular bio-based in the circular bio-based economy. The schedule of today is that we will start with a short introduction by Saskia Visser, then 4 talks in a row about the different perspectives of economy and partnerships by Hans van Mijl, Katrien Termeer, Calliope Panatsou, and Erik Mathias. So we would like to give the floor first to Saskia Visser, who is the program manager of circular systems at Wageningen University and Research. Please, Saskia, have the floor.
Yes, thank you. And I will start by sharing my screen. And hopefully you all see my screen now. Well, hello everybody. My name is Saskia Visser. I'm the program manager, Circular and Climate Neutral Society at Wageningen University and Research. And together with the people mentioned here in this screen, we are the organizing committee of the conference Circular WUR, Living Within the Planetary Boundaries. And a transition towards a circular bio-based society is actually currently broadly considered to be the answer to many of our societal challenges that we will have, like living within the planetary boundaries, climate change, etc. The circular systems of the future will close nutrient cycles and therefore minimizes the resources losses that we have. And in the future, the integrated circular systems will replace the linear systems, production systems, by making smart connections between our different production cycles on land, but also production cycles between land and marine systems, for instance. Already at this moment, and that's showing by the number of people that are present also in this webinar, a lot of people are working on the circular society. They are scientists, policymakers, entrepreneurs, or just concerned citizens. And they develop knowledge, tools, and expertise that can be used to facilitate these transitions. For instance, decision support tools that facilitate sustainable land use, nature-based solutions safeguarding our biodiversity, new business models, and practical tools that replace fossil-based products by bio-based products. We believe that only the combined actions of all these stakeholders can facilitate the so much needed transformative change, and therefore all these stakeholders should meet and be inspired by each other. And that's why we organize the conference Circular WUR, like Saskia said, from 6 to 8 December in 2021. The purpose of Circular WUR is to bring together all the pioneers in the circular bio-based society from all different backgrounds. And at the end of the conference, we hope that we can provide pathways to accelerate the transition towards such a circular bio-based economy and make it more clearer and to really speed up this transition. We have organized the conference along this graph for of the Sustainable Development Goals, and therefore we have organized the conference along 4 themes. We're thinking about the biosphere, the rethinking of our food and bio-based systems, and society, the social organization and risk management in a circular bio-based society. So these themes were covered in the previous webinar. And this webinar, we get more insights into the economy, so the economic perspective of such a society, and the partnerships, the needed governance of transitions in the circular society. Well, what can you expect at Circular WUR? Well, because we learned a lot from the technology developments that happened over the last year thanks to COVID, we organize a hybrid event, which will be both online and physically in Wageningen. And participants can be inspired by impactful keynotes. They can experience the circular challenges themselves by attending workshops or masterclasses, and they can visit innovative Dutch circular companies or Wageningen University research infrastructures which deal with our circular research at Wageningen. Well, like I said, we need all stakeholders to facilitate this transition towards a circular society, and therefore we think as an organizing committee we cannot design the program ourselves, but we should design the program of the conference together, and that's why we have now the call for sessions open. So 1st of March will be the deadline for the sessions for scientific sessions, masterclasses or workshops. And by the end of March, you will get a notification, whether your session is selected. And then from the 10th of April, we open up for a call for abstracts to present your paper, your research in one of the scientific sessions. Well, the format is described also on this slide, but also on our website. If you just type in Circular WUR in any searching machine, you will find it. But following this format, you can write a Word file and then send it to circular@wur.nl, and that's when you submit your session. Well, I hope you are inspired to attend the conference, and if you want to be more inspired, please listen to the follow-up of the webinars, because this is where we go into more content. Saskia?
Thank you very much. This was very clear. I think if there's any more questions related to how this can be, you can do this to contribute actively through organizing a scientific session, then feel free to send us your questions now in the chat, or later on in the discussion to discuss how we are going to go about this. By the way, I forgot to mention in the beginning that we are recording this webinar, so in case you do not want to be recorded, then please switch off your camera and your microphone and do not put anything in the chat. In any case, I would like everybody that is not talking to switch off their cameras and their microphones, so that everything goes more smoothly. If you have any questions, please post them in the chat, and then after each presentation from the presenters, I will allow for some clarifying questions straight after the presentation of the specific person, and then at the end of the webinar we have a Q&A and discussion on all the presentations together. So now I would like to start with the first presentation by Hans van Mijl. He is the program manager of food security and bio-based economy at Wageningen Economic Research, and also he is a special professor at agricultural economics and rural policy at Wageningen University. So please, Hans, tell us about your work.
Saskia, can you see my presentation?
Yes, perfect.
And can you see myself too? Or?
Yes, and I will switch off myself.
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity to talk about a very, for me, very interesting topic, and I hope it will also make some people enthusiastic to submit some papers or organize sessions to the conference. And I will look from a macroeconomic perspective, and some speakers later, like Erik, for example, will look, and Katrien will look more from a business and chain perspective. But I look from the overall perspective, and I want even to make it a little bit broader towards an inclusive and sustainable bioeconomy. So not looking only at the macroeconomic impacts, but also that's at the same time inclusive and sustainable. So a small introduction of an example. For example, we use biomass from forestry or crops, and we can use it demanded by food and feed, or on the other hand, it might be also for biomaterials and bioenergy. This, of course, increases demand. For example, if we want more biomaterials and bioenergy, and it might raise prices of primary products. Prices go up, demand go up, and this might have impact on the ground societal challenges. So because this creates jobs, so employment value will go up. So we substitute, for example, fossil plastic with bioplastic, so the dependency on non-renewables will go down. The greenhouse gas emissions will go down. But but it might also be, because of the higher prices, be challenging for food security, and we need land to produce all this biomass. So it might be a challenge for to keep biodiversity, and especially this trade-off and synergy effects. That is the focus often of these analysis. So we start with macroeconomics, but we want to extend to have not only look at economics, but the trade-offs with inclusiveness, social inclusiveness, and the environment. So a good starting point, and I think Saskia Visser was already mentioned to it, the Sustainable Development Goal. So we want to get the overall picture. But what is quite interesting is that if you look carefully at a lot of the SDGs, food systems is at the core. So food systems is at the core of a lot of solutions to poverty, zero hunger, climate action, responsible consumption and production. So it comes back over and over again, and it makes the agricultural side very central in the whole discussion. So the presentation, so to an inclusive and sustainable bioeconomy, and I will focus on a system analysis framework, but from a macroeconomic perspective. And we want coherent policy, so not only a policy that's good for example, renewable energy for the energy part, and it, on the other hand, it destroys nature or food security. Now we want to have coherent policies. And we look at not one societal grand challenges, but more societal grand challenges. So the EU bioeconomy. So I just want to start a little definition. It covers all sectors and systems that rely on biological resources, their functions and principle. So it includes ecosystems on land and sea, primary production sectors, agriculture, forestry, aquaculture, waste, side stream, but also economic sectors and industry based on biological resources and processes to produce food, feed, bio-based products, energy and services. So it can become quite a substantial part of the whole economy. And this is the core of the Europe's bioeconomy strategy. So Europe strengthened the connection between economy, society and environment. So what are these 5 challenges of big objectives? On the one hand, ensuring food security. It's one of the core things of agriculture, of course, but it needs a transformation towards sustainable, healthy, nutrition sensitive, resource efficient, resilient, circular and inclusive food and farming systems. It's a lot, but it's at least that's in the challenges. And at the same time, managing natural resources sustainable. So preserving the productivity of all ecosystems. And at the same time, reducing dependency on non-renewable resources like fossil sources, because they are also important for the next point, mitigation, adaptation to climate change. But also agriculture is quite in the middle. On the one hand, as it is a big producer of emission, on the other hand, it has the ability to mitigate emissions and create even negative emissions. And of course, it has to create jobs and maintain European competitiveness. So sustainable and inclusive, if you have these grand challenges, then the red ones, ensuring food security and creating jobs and maintaining European competitiveness, is quite important for inclusiveness. And then growth is not only important, but also the distribution of growth. And then sustainable, managing natural resources, reducing dependency on non-renewable resources, and mitigation adaptation to climate change. So I designed a system analysis framework. I will be very brief about this, very schematic. So at the middle, we have the whole economy. It's the supply and demand of all sectors of the bioeconomy. It starts with agri-forestry, food, feed, biomaterials, energy. And then what are the drivers of the systems, technological change, economic growth, population growth? What are the constraints we have in the system, like land, water, labor, non-renewable resources? And of course, we want to influence the societal challenges. And these were food security, employment. I just mentioned them. And in principle, how we want to change them is by changing the policies and strategies, the policies of governments, of the strategy of firms. And if we change the policies and strategy, we change the drivers, and the whole system will change. And hopefully at the end, we get a better mix of the societal challenges. I look from a macroeconomic perspective. What does it mean? Because not all people are here economists of macroeconomists. So that in a lot of cases, we try to include external effects. These are costs and benefits for somebody who did not choose it, like emissions that produce climate change. It will have impacts on farmers, and of course they did not choose it. And the emissions might be emitted by energy sectors or other sectors. So what we can try to do is calculate costs and benefits of different options to solve the problem and what are the pros and cons of the different options. We look relative to substitution effects that sometimes is a new product is a substitute for another product. Like if you have a green plastic and a bioplastic, and the green plastic is a substitute for the fossil-based plastic, but it means also that if this green plastic grows, the fossil-based plastic sector will decline, and it has implications for stakeholders, owners, people who work in the sector. So we try to have both sides of the picture, that we don't only look at the new things, but also what's replaced by these new developments, because this has structural impacts, and this might also cause for a lot of resistance for people to change, and by maybe compensating or helping these people to make the transitions, you can get the transition. And it's also quite good, these tools to get an eye on indirect effects. So the price effects penetrates other markets. For example, if we save a lot on oil, the oil price will go down, but this will make oil cheaper, and that will other people will substitute to more oil. So this indirect effect might be quite important, and we try to take into account. So from a macroeconomic perspective, so macroeconomics, we have an engine of growth, and in general, in our models, capital will be accumulated as diminishing returns. So it needs tech change to keep this marginal return from falling. This tech change is often labor saving, as we see in practice. This means labor saving. There's also more production per unit of labor, higher income per capita. Higher income per capita means more consumption, and in this way you get a stable growth in the long run. But this growth also requires more inputs such as land, materials, and energy. So if we want a future with growth that uses less land, materials, and energy, you need to decouple growth for input use. And a lot of developments are in that direction. But as long as there's growth, there's a scale effect, because then we need more consumption, more use of inputs. So that might be a very difficult thing to reach at the end. And therefore, I say sometimes we need a new engine of growth, or slow growth, or even degrowth, as mentioned by some people. And also papers in this direction will really try to dive into this degrowth or a new engine of growth are very welcomed at the conference. And I'm very interested in it, because it's a big challenge in economics. So we work often with, if you do try to quantify these effects, you often use, for example, a computer general equilibrium model that includes the whole economy. It includes production and consumption, markets clear, you get the prices, and then you use all kind of resources, and of course it's traded all across the world. So this is a full flow of income and expenditures across the whole economy. And then you have in several ways, you have the famous GDP equations, that the GDP is equal to consumption plus investment plus government plus exports and imports. It's also equal to all kind of factor income, and it's also equal to the production. These are just, in principle, accounting identities, and often this is too much used as a target GDP, as is often criticized by others. And therefore, we have also to think about other welfare measures that take into account also income inequality and nature things and so on. So this model, it's a closed economic system, so there's no manna from heaven. We often see solutions that you just say a technical change is coming and will solve all the problems. In principle, in these models, it is less possible. We can address multiple objectives. Behavior is key, so we focus on producer and consumer choices. And you can do all kind of experiments with different incentives and drivers. And of course, you have to join forces with other disciplines if you really want to cover also the biophysical realities. So we work together with a global consortium in this context, where the OECD, FAO, European Commission, World Bank are all our members, because we need a global data set that covers the whole economy, and that's an enormous effort. I took a few examples. Get an eye on the time. Yeah. For example, the EU Biofuel Directive on world prices. the orange bars, you see that in general we had decreasing agricultural prices over the long run, and our model also simulates that. And if you do biofuel policies, you see that the prices increase because you demand more, prices go up, and in even oilseeds you can go from a decreasing price to a positive price. Now, if you do the global targets for biofuels worldwide, you get, of course, a lot of biofuels demand. This was a couple of years ago, and then you see that the impact on the prices, on the world prices, is much bigger. And why is this prices important? Because the prices of food is also important if you are a poor consumer. Of course, if you are a farmer, you like it, but if you are a consumer, it causes you trouble, and this might cause trouble in terms of food security effects. We did also a study for our Dutch government. It's the Microeconomic assessment of the bioeconomy, and they were interested. So if we use a lot of these resources, waste and so on, and if we use it also in a bio-based economy to produce biochemicals, what does it deliver us? And they had a kind of roadmap. I cannot go into too much detail, but in principle, at the first period, they were only introducing the RED, that's more renewable energy directive, and that's actually replacing an efficient fossil-based technology with a bio-based technology, and the bio-based technology was more costly. So this is negative in terms of GDP. So in a global scenario, when you have global markets, it costs 200 million euro, and if you have a regional market, where you only source regionally, it was minus 800 million euro. But then they want us to invest in all kind of technologies, like my colleagues of FBR are doing, that you want to make chemicals out of it. And then it is also depending on how much do you invest in it. If you have a low technological scenario, then it becomes better in terms of GDP, but it's still negative. But if you really invest quite a bit, that you make the new technologies more efficient, more competitive, then you can also have even positive economic effects of these bio-based developments. So this is, of course, interesting to know, because sometimes they're also just interested in the macroeconomic impacts. It's a big project going on in Europe. It's called Biomonitor. Where you try to monitor the bioeconomy, because a lot of data, especially on these new developments, are not available, like the bio-based chemicals, bio-based plastics. It's still not totally in our national statistics. And there we also try to make this better, the model better suited for it, by focusing also on bioplastics, bio-based chemicals, and biopharmaceuticals. And we also make there a very detailed partial equilibrium model on bio-based materials. And if you go to circularity, because I think that was also what Saskia Visser mentioned, it was quite a big challenge also for these economic models, because a lot of the economic thinking is especially in the data, is linear data. You have inputs, you produce something, you consume something, and then you waste it. And this is also in our data, because waste has no value, it becomes not in economic statistics. But if you think about the circular economy, the key thing you have to do is to bring circular flows in your system, and that means that you have to collect all the waste. And therefore we have the households, the government, and all waste is collected. We built in a new module. We collect green waste, the grey waste, paper and glass, and the green waste, for example, you can compost, you can make biomass of it, and this biomass you can use for biofertilizer, bioenergy, second generation biofuels, and biochemicals. Also, Alexander Gatto is doing now a PhD in the investment project of circularity on this issue to try to grasp this, because these are really challenges for an economic model, because you have to collect a lot of data that are not in the normal economic statistics. And then you can, of course, you work together with material flow people. You have to closely work together with biophysical people. And then, for example, the waste collected, we have these flow diagrams. So where is the waste collected? Is it in primary agriculture, fishery, processed foods, livestock, or manufacturing? So it goes to the waste collecting sectors, and then also is it composted, recycling, landfilling, and what are the, for example, emissions with it. And then we can do all kind of simulations and can see what are the changes in this whole picture. I want to say a little bit, although it focuses here on economics, that it's also the equality dimension is often forgotten in a lot of the discussions, and it's to my heart. So on the one hand, you have the sustainability dimension, where you have a more sustainable world, more green, and so on and so on. But at the moment, one of the big trends is also that we get a more unequal world. So the income distribution is more unequal, the food distribution is more unequal. So in our system is an enormous inequality. And then also, can we do something in this respect? And in the Food Secure project, we focused on a world, we call it ecotopia, but it's more sustainable, different lifestyle, but also more equal. And we had all kinds of scenarios. Of course, we are in a world that's very unequal, very unsustainable, and of course you want to go to that direction. And we made with all kinds of stakeholders, we made these four scenarios. And this is a Lorenz curve, for those who know it, is a measure of income distribution. But what was quite striking is that whatever scenario we made with the stakeholders, the income distribution was worsening, so it became more unequal. So in our economic systems are drivers that go to a more unequal world, and only by policy intervention, of other kind of interventions, you can reverse it. And this is a very strong finding. That's also one thing we have to fight in principle at the same time, because growth is not enough. It's also a lot about the distribution of income. Yeah, a little bit about climate change impact. So the climate change impact, you get all kind of different in yields. That means that if you have lower productivity, you need more area, and a lot impacts is on the prices. And of course, this was very critical from a food security perspective. So this is the impact of climate change. And then we did also some studies that looked at mitigation efforts. So if you want to mitigate the emissions, also from agriculture, you want to reduce emissions. But then, and I will only give the big picture, is it mitigation options. You could see that, that on agricultural production, they were sometimes even worse than the climate change effect themselves. So you have to be very careful how you mitigate, because otherwise the impacts on food security might be even more negative. And so, and maybe at the end you have to mitigate, and you have to reduce emissions a lot of agriculture, but then you have maybe also to think about compensating measures, that you increase productivity or reduce waste or do other things that you don't compromise the food security impacts. So my last slide, it's and that's also maybe a little bit to an invitation to people to submit sessions or papers on these. Because one of the key things for me is, do we need a new engine of growth? Can we change it, that we get a kind of growth that's more equal and less polluting? So and that includes externalities. So like negative externalities from emissions, for example, or reducing biodiversity. Positive externalities from knowledge generation. It includes substitution effects. So you take into account, if I have a new technology, a new green development, it also replaces old mechanisms, and it includes also indirect effects, because otherwise you get not to the right things, and it can focus on multiple objectives. It includes circularity in waste and reuse of materials. And on the other hand, we have to think about decoupled growth and resource use. Resource use, materials, emissions, this might not be enough. So we need changes in lifestyle, less is more, take care of our common home where we live in, take into account future generation, producer behavior, governments. Maybe we have to rebalance work and leisure, short and long-term investments. And also a lot of the tech change is in one or another way, as these times, labor saving. And this is one of the problems, as I explained before, and maybe it should be more and more directed directly at the grand challenges. This was my story, Saskia, and now I give it back to you.
Thank you very much, Hans. It was very interesting and enlightening, especially for people that do not know too much about the economy. So it's very interesting to hear this. You, however, did manage to fill in your 20 minutes completely. Any questions that may come, I would like to save for after all the other three presentations. So now I would like to continue with the next presentation that will be given by Professor Katrien Termeer. She's the chair of the Public Administration and Policy Group at Wageningen University. And the title of her talk is Governing Circular Bioeconomy Through Small Win Strategy. Please, Katrien, you have the floor. Maybe you can make it in presentation mode.
Yes, I have, but can you see it now?
Yes, but it's I can see it, but I still see the little slides on the side. It's not so important, but then we can see what is coming.
Is it now okay?
No, but just go ahead. Doesn't matter.
Oh, because I see the whole slides. Okay. The mystery of teams, so to say. Now, thank you, Saskia. My name is Katrien Termeer. I'm a professor of public administration and policy at Wageningen University. And I have many projects related to the circular bioeconomy. To mention some, I'm as a consultant, I'm involved in controversies on biomass in the Netherlands. Other projects is about second generation biorefinery and the conflicts involved in that. I have projects on circular agriculture. But today I want to address one of my most favorite topics, and that is the question, okay, then I also refer to many things Hans was talking about, and sometimes he mentioned, okay, but bioeconomy, it requires a transition. And my main question is, okay, a transition, and then people also refer to policies and to government, but how can governments and other organizations govern a transition towards a circular bioeconomy? And okay, but let's continue. And it's easy to say that those bioeconomy requires transformative change, but first of all, it's important to reflect, okay, talking about change, what are we referring to? And in literature, three modes of change are distinguished. First order change, so you improve the system a little bit. Second order change, then you aim for changing the structures, the cultures and of a system, but you already know how the new system will look like. Yes.
It's not going well. You are. I'm still in the first slide. We all are still in the first slide. Probably you're sharing the wrong screen or something like that.
I think you have two presentations open.
Now what do you see now?
Now I see the one is in depth, fast and large scale.
But I'm not sure whether this is... No.
Katrien, sorry. Je hebt de PowerPoint openstaan en er staat Enable Editing. Dus hij kan niet in de presentatiemodus. Als je op het schermpje bovenin in de PowerPoint ballen klikt, zie je de presentatiemodus staan. Als je daarop klikt, als het goed is, komt hij dan in de slide te staan. Zie je dat? Eentje naar boven. Ja, nu zien we jou.
Wat zie je nu?
En nu zien we jou, dus je moet je scherm weer even delen.
Wat zie je nu?
Zie je presentatie en je staat op de eerste slide. Bioeconomy requires transformative change.
De tweede slide sta je nu.
Oké.
Tweede slide. Ja, als je nu op het presentatie-icoontje drukt boven in je scherm van PowerPoint. Ja.
Oké. Nou, oké. Then I hope to continue. Three modes of change. Improvement. Transition. Then you know you want to change the system and the structures and the cultures of a system, but you know how the preferred future looks like. And then the third part, that's third order change, that's much more in depth. then you have some vague ideas about a preferred future, but you do not know how it looks like, and there are different trajectories towards it, and that's called transformation. And talking about the bioeconomy, I think it's in between second order and third order change, so both transitions and transformations. But first order, more of the same is not sufficient. But then there's the paradox. And do you see the slide of the paradox?
Yes.
Okay. There's a paradox involved in governing transformative change. And that is that policymakers, politicians, they are quite impatient. And if they aim for transformative change, they want it to be in depth, fast, and large scale, the whole system. But from literature, we know that is not possible at the same time. If you go for fast, it will not be in depth. Or if you go for large scale, it will also not be in depth or not fast. So focusing on those three elements at the same time is impossible. Therefore, we developed the alternative in which we depart from in-depth change. And that alternative is referred to the so-called small wins approach, and that is dealing with societal problems through small but important in-depth steps with visible results that in the end can accumulate in transformative change. So that means that there are no master plans or big fast trajectories, but starting with small in-depth changes that can be accumulated. Now, these ideas are rooted in different theories. First, social psychology from Carl Weick. Second, political science from Lindblom, his ideas of muddling through. And third, appreciative inquiry from organizational change management based on the idea that of a positive theory of change. So don't disqualify people, but try to encourage things that are already going well. Now, what are the examples of small wins so that you get a picture of that? Now, there are many examples. And many people, they think about new concepts, like, for example, Kipster, revolutionary farm, chicken farm who uses waste of bakeries. But it could also be a citizen initiative. You see it with the Wasted, a plastic upcycling initiative in Amsterdam, a neighborhood initiative. But it could also be a new regulation. In many countries, the ban on free plastic bags, and there are many people who say that's peanuts only, only a ban on free plastic, but it can accumulate in transformative change. Or a Dutch example, the vegetarian butcher who started in a small place behind his firm, but it developed in a big company. Now, then, of course, the question is, and why is starting with small wins only? And there are three arguments for it. And the first is a more psychological argument that if you start with change at a small level, then it can be more in depth because it has less risk that it paralyzes people. And so downscaling moderates arousal and improves also diagnosis and innovative tailored responses. The second is that it could also be faster. And that's an argument made by Lindblom already, who argues that small steps are less threatening and have less political risks. And they also allow to start with incomplete information. Because if you go for a big chance, then there are always arguments to postpone. We need more information, more research, etc. So it could also be faster. And finally, large scale. The argument, okay, with small wins, yeah, that's peanuts only. Then you can't solve all those very important, urgent societal issues. But the idea is also that these small wins, they can amplify and change a vicious circle into a virtuous one. But of course, then you need the right incentives. And to use a metaphor, if you want to go to the upper floor of your department, you can try to spring, but in the end, it's always faster if you take the stairs. Another thing, if you look at small wins, and we developed some tables with indicators for that, that's important because there's a lot of misunderstanding. And first of all, a small win must always have a visible result. So no vague paper promises. It must be in-depth change. So not more of the same or low-hanging fruit, but radical new practices of the second or third order change. Third, it's always a mixture from technical and social innovation. So technical pilots only or new collaboration only is not a small win yet. Fourth, and that's very important also for accumulating those small wins, is that it's always a place of energy and not a place with cynical people, for example. Fifth, it must contribute to an ambition, in our case, a circular bioeconomy. If not, it are small losses. And finally, and that's also an important one, small wins have always overcome barriers at a small scale. If not, then I'm not sure if it's really a small win, because organizing in-depth change without overcoming tensions or barriers is impossible. But those small wins have learned at a small scale how to overcome them. And then, of course, I've already referred to it many times, that with one small win, you can't save the world, so to say. Yeah? So then there's no transformative change yet. So those small wins need to accumulate. And mostly people talk in the transition literature then about upscaling only, but we distinguish between three pathways. And I will illustrate them based on the Repair Cafe. That's also started as a small initiative. People in the cellar of the basement of their house, they repair stuff from people. But if you look at the three pathways, it can be spreadened, so a kind of upscaling. For example, at the moment we have 16,050 repair cafes in 35 countries. So that's replicating the same example at other places. The second pathway is broadening, and that means that you couple a repair cafe with other societal problems. For example, with social coherence in a neighborhood, with the appreciation of technical skills, with city restoration, and by coupling it to other societal problems, it becomes more robust and more important, and you can attract more funding, etc. The third one is deepening, and that means that, okay, a repair cafe, but it's still end of pipe, so to say. So is it a good strategy to go for upscaling only? Isn't it possible to make it more radical, so more in depth? And then it's an interesting example from the repair cafes that because there are so many, they collected all information about reparations, and they used that information and their whole network with all the power involved in it to negotiate with production firms in order to redesign their production process. And then you are on a higher scale in the circular cycle. But then, of course, it's the question, okay, but how to influence those accumulation, the spreading, broadening, and deepening. And here you see a kind of overview of the small wins framework. You have a single small win with the characteristics, and then the aim is how to come from one small win through spreading, broadening, deepening in that transformative change. And most of our research is focused on that at the moment. And I hear an echo. Do you hear that also? Okay.
Katrien, het is volgens mij weg nu.
Okay, it left. Okay. So, and then the idea is what policy interventions are helpful to propel and to accumulate those pathways. And then we analyzed some mechanisms. And in this lecture, I have no time to elaborate them all, but it's about energizing, how to energize the people that they continue, how, and others are experimenting, logic of attraction, robustness, coupling. So the idea is not to have single list with barriers and then interventions how to overcome the barriers. No, the idea is to analyze the propelling mechanisms that encourage people to continue and to enable resources flowing to it. And then we, based on many projects, we developed a list, okay, and I think it's not readable, but that's also not that important. That is okay. What can we say about existing policies of governmental initiatives? And then we develop a list with interventions from governments that are productive and interventions that do the opposite. And I can mention many examples, but I think that's not important. But yeah, probably I have to do it. And for example, what helps to energize people is to create an enthusiastic community, for example. What doesn't help is to disqualify laggards. So all the theory on transitions about followers and the peloton and forerunners, I always feel that's not helpful because it disqualifies people. Another thing, for example, is experimenting. Now, it can be helpful. Many European programs are helpful for experimenting. But what's, for example, not helpful is that there are all kinds of many job rotations in departments so that you never know with whom to deal. Now, but I think I don't have time to elaborate on this list, but that's what we are doing at the moment. And on the conference, we have many PhDs working on this. They can elaborate on this. But the question is, of course, okay, I started with how to govern a circular bioeconomy. And then if you talk about circular bioeconomy, you can't expect that linear governance systems are helpful. So also with the small wins approach, they do not combine in a neat linear form, which each step being closer to the predetermined goal. So what is then a non-linear strategy to govern circular bioeconomy? And that's the 4 steps. First, you start with an ambition. What do you aim for talking about that circular bioeconomy? Then the next step as a government is, okay, are there already small wins that can help to fulfill your ambitions? How to value them instead of disqualifying them, and how to initiate new small wins. Then the third step, okay, if we have those small wins, how to activate the propelling mechanisms that can amplify them. And that are the policy interventions. And then finally, appreciating those small wins and so that they can feed back into the process where they can accelerate the virtuous circle. So that means that governing a circular bioeconomy is not a linear process from a project to a success with all those steps, but it's more from complexity theory, from how to understand the propelling mechanisms and how to use those mechanisms as leverage for policy interventions. Now, thank you for your interest, and I think it's a lot of information. Here is some are some papers if you want to read more about it. But going back to the conference, so we are interested in various theories about governing a bioeconomy, and this is one of the theories, a small wins approach, but there are others. And we are also interested in empirical analysis of that. So we don't wait for papers who conclude transformative change is needed and therefore we need a government and policies. No, we want to have in-depth analysis of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katrien. It was very interesting. Due to time, I will continue now with the next speaker, and any questions to Katrien, please keep them with you, and we will discuss it at the end after the other two presentations. So our next speaker is Calliope Patutsu, sorry. She is working as an agricultural engineer at the Center for Environmental Policy at the Imperial College London, and she will tell us about optimizing the economic value of bio-based solutions. Please, Calliope, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. Good afternoon. I think what's in the previous presentations, I think, oh, sorry, I need to make it larger. So does that show well? The slide.
Yes, perfect.
Okay, so I'm going to elaborate, build on what the colleagues said, Hans and Katrien, and speak a little bit about optimizing the economic value of bio-based solutions, talk about value chains and competitive priorities and the role of governance. I think this ties well with what previous speakers have also said. So I'm just going to briefly talk about the bio-based value chain themselves and the optimization through value chain and competitive priority approaches. Measuring the competitive priorities with robust measures is important. The role of indicators, a little bit about life cycle thinking and life cycle cost. And the role of governance, shown a little bit some initial results for policy and modeling capacities, and then conclude with some considerations of what's next, and an invite for all of you to submit abstracts in the conference even towards the end of this year. In a nutshell, value chains of bio-based solutions are complex. I think we're all very aware of this fact. Sometimes it complicates our everyday working life. So a clear focus is essential to improve their performance, and to do that, defining priorities and using appropriate metrics can steer support towards interventions that will overcome the challenges that these value chains face and improve their performance. Policies are in place, numerous of them. I will speak a little bit after. Further coordination of interventions that target challenges and are integrated along the value chain can provide help. And last but not least, governance must be inclusive. There are institutions, but things are working on a global scale, from a local to a global, or from a global to a local scale. So these institutions must reach out to the global initiatives, to the society itself, and also collaborate with social movements on the ground and make sure everybody understands and embraces the changes and the transition towards bioeconomy. Again, the bio-based value chain is a complex series of processes. Most of the value chains are increasingly varied and innovative. There's scale up, there are low TRL, there are broad feedstocks. Some of them are difficult feedstocks. There are issues of land use. all of the value chain and the way things are moving. There's the imperative to comply with resource efficient and sustainable practices. So far, it's understandable if you're dealing with a complex system. You have open-ended, inconsistent and unrelated metrics sometimes, and if there is lack of coherence and system thinking to incorporate the challenges, then you have a mix of findings that sometimes confuse policymakers or give them fragmented solutions. So the individual, and this on top of that, the individual stages within the bio-based value chains interrelate both physical assets, because we're talking about biophysical capacities, but also market attributes. So this cannot be easily fully addressed by single target optimization. And it needs more integration across the value chain to understand. Why the value chain approach is to address this interconnectivity, and why competitive priorities is to focus on the challenges. That way you can understand the system, define the key stages and the underlying activities, identify the challenges that trigger major uncertainties, and explore the competitive priorities that will, when implemented or when targeted, they can foster sustainability and resource efficiency. You can then focus on economic, social and environmental challenges and propose metrics that are fit to measure the performance and overcome the challenges, and also provide focus for policy on these competitive priorities. And that way you can optimize the strategies and the information for policy to improve the evidence, first of all, then translate some of the metrics to comprehensive messages, because not always the messages that come out from our work are easily understandable by policy or by simple people, and be transparent, allow stakeholders to trace the rationale of any decision, and of course enable monitoring future projections and comparisons. Okay. Again, understand the system. I won't stay on the system, but there are several stages here. We try to capture it from land use, meaning you have to have a suitable land for biomass production. And then within the biomass production, you have various feedstock typologies, and the aim is to secure and sustainably source raw material on an annual basis, year round, and to convert it through a resource-efficient valorization of both main product and co-products, provide end products that can offer sustainable solutions to informed citizens. There are many activities here. We just try to capture a few of them, but each of them entails certain challenges and requires regulation and enabling policies. Competitive priorities can include many here, because we're talking about economics. I'm just referring to some we've recently been analyzing, including flexibility, which means you have a value chain and you try to optimize the ability to expand or adjust the capacity, volume, or the product design and the variety. You need to make sure you take care of quality issues, improving the process through the process, but also the product performance and adherence to quality standards. And of course, cost is central to all of these, because
you're muted. Can you unmute?
Hello?
Yes, now we can hear you again. Thank you.
You're welcome. Can you see the presentation? I guess yes.
Yes, we can see your presentation.
Sorry for that. So cost is in the center of the competitive priorities, both for the production costs of the bio-based solutions, but also for the added value generated. So creating value with improved cost is important, especially when we're talking about highly innovative value chains and components. And then you have innovation and transparency. Again, here it's an indicative example of trying to define challenges and competitive priorities across the value chain. To do that, you need to focus the assessment and through co-creation approaches and be inclusive of working with global partnerships, local communities, social groups. Especially recent research shows that it's important to include groups of people that are usually underrepresented in local communities where a biorefinery or a bio-based development is taking place, such as elderly people, the young generation. They need to be involved when you're going through a stage of focusing and understanding what are the challenges and what you should prioritize to improve the value chain and embed it within rural areas or embed it within a certain environment. Measuring with robust metrics, again, the sustainability umbrella has social and environmental. Here I'm just focusing on the economic. Economic value mostly relates to, through the value chain, again, the affordability of land, the production and purchase costs of the biomass feedstock, the efficiency, the cost-efficient conversion of the product, the market and price dynamics. You heard from the previous speakers that there are different. Once you one product takes priority, the other one probably faces competition, so there's a certain balance that is needed, and local employment. Here again, it's just an example of landscaping indicators across the main activities of the value chain and trying to understand how different competitive priorities impact them and which one can influence which indicator. Here we've used a set of indicators that are taken by the most common econometric models, but it can also be any other type of indicator. So we've used levelized life cycle costs, the technology readiness for the feedstock and for the conversion, investments, gross value added to the region and to the economic sector, the FTE, the number of full-time job per end product, and the contribution to the rural economy. As I mentioned, life cycle costing within the life cycle thinking can be a useful tool. It's not, of course, the only one. It is a unit cost approach across value chain stages, so it resembles the other models, economic models, and it can also assess at the same time effects on social welfare caused by changes that would otherwise would not be accounted for, called externalities. This in bio-based value chains facilitates the grouping of budget costs, transfers and externalities for each biomass supply and value chain stage, and can identify physical and economic parameters that relate to the nature of these value chains, which I mentioned before, that it's both physical or biophysical and also market related. Of course, I won't stand out. Hans presented quite an elaborate analysis of the different modeling capacities, and life cycle costing is not the only one. To optimize complex multidisciplinary bio-based systems, you have techno-economic assessment, market assessment systems, modeling, future scoping, modeling, and case studies and behavioral characterization and expert elicitation approaches. The role of governance into all of this, more than 60 countries so far with strategies for bio-based solutions, more than 90 policies with relevance to bioeconomy in EU, more than 40 modeling capacities providing evidence. This is analysis again within the European project BioMonitor, I will explain. And the European Green Deal that has set win-win solutions with the Sustainable Development Goals for the economic recovery and social resilience following the pandemic within safe planetary boundaries. Again, there has been a survey by the colleagues in the International Advisory Council of Global Bioeconomy in Berlin, in Germany, and it presents some interesting insights for the more than 60 countries from stakeholders in the countries with strategies. You can see, I just illustrate a couple of the graphs that illustrate the importance of identified national governance, but also international governance, which takes me back to the point when I mentioned that institutions have to be, and governance has to be inclusive. It is fine to develop a bioeconomy within your national borders, but it's important also to have in mind the international linkages, the relations, and make sure these things go hand in hand, because they are more efficient, more effective in their application. Again, you can see the lack of capital and commercialization support. So the economic enabling policies are ranked of a very high importance. Of course, there are issues of lack of market access, limited infrastructure, consumer acceptance. Still, financing the economic value is very important. And in the ranking for the international governance, it comes, the lack of international funding mechanisms comes third, but still it is very important. Is the policy framework adequate? We've recently published a review of more than 90 biomass policies, biomass, bioprocessing and bio-based product policies that exist within the European Union. And we analyze them for their relevance and coherence to the bioeconomy objectives of the European Bioeconomy Strategy of 2018. So many of them are still not completely coherent with the core bioeconomy objectives and do not act in synergy. Only a few policy documents include the term bioeconomy. However, they do enable or regulate some of the objectives of the bioeconomy strategy. And within the recommendations of the work is that there's a need to complement existing policies with a mix of instruments, financial, regulatory information provision, and improve coherence with the European Green Deal, the circular bioeconomy, and the Sustainable Development Goals. This is the work that is ongoing within a Biomonitor project that also Hans has mentioned. We have been mapping at the moment based on the work that colleagues have done in the project, reviewing modeling capacities. We are trying now to illustrate how different models capture the different value chain stages and what type of scenarios they have been working with, what gaps are there, and how can future scenarios elaborate modeling. We're trying to somehow, I guess there are other initiatives as well, but we are trying to illustrate what has been mentioned also by colleagues in Germany in the book Bioeconomy for Beginners, that there is a double integration challenge in the governance. You do have a number of innovative technologies, but you also have different challenges in the governance internationally and nationally, and this is something that is quite complicated to capture. Again, this is part of work we are doing at the moment, as included in the biomonitoring project. If models can evaluate the performance, the integrated performance for bioeconomy, and this is just a snapshot of different models that deal with sustainable agriculture. Again, this is 15 out of the 40. There are many more models around. These are the set of models we are examining within the European Union. And you can see that they are quite spread in the way they capture the different sectors and in the way they capture the value chain stages and the indicators they use. Some governance considerations, and of course, please submit your abstracts and your work to inform and provide more evidence to the already very dynamic sector. So research and innovation, good governance can support research to learn about its methods, potential cost and side effects. Life cycle thinking, establish mechanisms and tools needed to develop agreement, coordination standards and incentives to ensure change throughout the whole sector and ensure a real and successful bio-based transition. Supporting appropriate adoption and upscaling. Good governance and incentives should support and upscale carbon removal and bio-based solutions. Establishing social and environmental safeguards. Good institutions will be needed to balance the potential benefits of carbon removal and the bio-based solutions with its social and environmental risks. Policy focus governance on critical challenges that lower performance and restrict future implementation. And the financing, there are various green funds around and different funding available to improve process efficiency, product quality and scale up. Targeting co-location with existing biorefineries seems to be a favorable option. There is some further information, some further reading, and of course there's many more. And just a request, we have a survey as part of the work I've been showing in the last slides. We're trying to build narratives for the future through the bioeconomy and the Biomonitor project, so we would welcome your opinion. So please join our survey, which is online. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Calliope. It was very interesting. Maybe you could share this link that you have provided in your last slide in the chat so that people can find it easier.
Definitely, thank you.
Then we quickly move on to the last speaker, which is Erik Mathias. He is a professor of bioscience engineering at the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium. And here is the title of his talk is a Typology of Sustainable Circular Business Models based on hierarchical model and applications in the bioeconomy. Please, Erik.
Thank you, Saskia. Can you hear me? Can you see the screen?
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Everything perfect.
Thank you. So I'm a professor of agriculture and resource economics at Leuven University, and what I'll be doing in the next 15 to 20 minutes is to present some of our work that I'm doing together with Erika de Keizer, who is also in the meeting, by the way, and Lisbeth Franken, who is coordinating a Horizon 2020 innovation action that just started up called Rustica. The aim of Rustica is to demonstrate circular different types of biofertilizers and implement them in optimized fertilizer strategies and value chains. And within the Rustica, I am, or together with Erika, we are responsible for the development of business models for these set of new technologies. And here I would like to refer to what Hans was saying. Hans indicated to the need at a macro level for to internalize externalities, for example, or even take a sufficiency approach. Calliope already indicated some metrics and then some value chain developments to do that, but also indicated the lack of coherence in policies. I would even say that in the absence of policies, you would still have to try to develop, or coherent policies, and you still need to develop business models around all these new technologies. And in Rustica, we're also doing the kind of things that Calliope was referring to, which is market analysis, life cycle analysis, cost-benefit analysis or life cycle costing, agent-based modeling. We're using all these tools for developing these value chains. But in the end, we also want to go one step further, which is to integrate all this information into very concrete business models. So you could say that's the co-creation phase that that Calliope was referring to, but not only co-create with or involve local stakeholders, but basically co-create the new types of business models between farmers, processors, retailers, consumers, who have you, whoever is important in realizing these changes. Because an important barrier to implementing the circular bioeconomy, by definition, is that we need appropriate business models in order to outperform, let's call that the linear fossil economy business models, right? And of course, we can refer to policy and wait for policy for that to happen. But there are other business models, and we do see on the ground all kinds of business models that, despite policy absence or non-coherence, they do develop interesting business models for circular bioeconomy applications. However, we do see that, and Calliope mentioned social aspects, but she didn't go into it. So I suppose I'll complement a little bit her talk with focusing on organizational and social aspects of business models. Because if you take a broad look at the literature on business models and how people talk about business models, they mainly talk about the technological part. Are we going to recycle things? Are we going to use? So it's the biophysical part of everything. Also at the macro level, this is where all the talk is. How is all the data going to be collected? And we need all the biophysical data to make economic sense of that biophysical data. But on top of all that, there's also an organizational and a social layer, and in which the literature is not so abundant, which means that actually a truly holistic typology of sustainable circular business model, you could say it's still incomplete. What we did, we built up on two papers published some time ago, in which Boons and Ludeke Freund identify, so next to technological innovation, also the importance of organizational and social innovation. And a year later, Bokken et al. In the Journal of Cleaner Production then identified, based on this typology, 8 what they called archetypes, archetypes of sustainable circular business models. So representing different groups of innovative business models with some similar traits. And let's say that they put the different elements of technological organization and social innovation next to each other, which is fine. But what we try to do, to give more guidance also to technology developers, we would like to also in the Ristica project go one step further and integrate these into, let's say, new archetypes in which you combine technological, organizational, and social innovation, and that's basically the objective of our work, and some of the preliminary insights that I would like to present here today. And of course, it's very preliminary, so any feedback and already the papers that Calliope has been referring to will be very useful to look into this. So the objective of our work is to design a more holistic typology of sustainable circular business models in order to develop also pathways for sustainable business model innovation and to support the co-creation processes of all these actors who are trying to build business models. And well, let's face it, the methodology that is being used most is the business model canvas. So we're also will use that kind of approaches in a practical approach because it's an innovation action. And what we will do is illustrate our new typology based on literature on biogas digesters. But the final aim is basically to explore whether this typology, or how that typology looks like, what does it mean for bioeconomy applications, and specifically, of course, for the biofertilizers that we're looking into in the context of Ristica. So let me introduce these 8 archetypes identified by Bokken et al. in 2014. And so let me try to use a pointer. Yeah. And so basically, they identified 3 technological, 3 social, and 2 organizational archetypes, and they presented them next to each other, as you can see here. So in the technological aspect, the options are to maximize efficiency or to create value from waste, so recycling, or to substitute with renewables. So these are the technological pathways, and you can see the many examples that you will find under these 3 streams or archetypes. And I would say most of the literature, or lots of the literature, is about this, especially in the environmental science literature, ecological literature, the technical literature. But then they included these 3 social archetypes, which is rather than focus on ownership of products. This business model is based on to deliver functionality. And so the famous example is that you can lease heat rather than or lease light. In energy sector, there's plenty of examples of that. Or car, of course. A car is, rather than owning a car, you're sharing a car. Car sharing is probably the easiest example for this. The second is adopt a stewardship role, so that more looks into social profit. Takes a stewardship role into, for example, biodiversity protection or resource stewardship. And then the third approach reflects what the degrowth perspective. Well, I don't know whether it's a degrowth perspective. Sufficiency doesn't, by definition, mean degrowth, but it's basically a business model where you can earn money by reducing demand, by selling less, which is a counterintuitive business model. But where we do have examples, for example, in the building sector, where, for example, firms are renovating houses, making money on those renovations and in the end result is lower energy use, so a sufficiency result. So does that mean degrowth or not? I don't know, but here, of course, we are at the micro level, so that's that. Whereas the degrowth issue is more a macro level example or issue. And then the organizational issue, in which they also distinguish between 2 archetypes. One is to repurpose business model for societal. That's a not-for-profit approach or a cooperative approach, where your priority is to achieve social goals or environmental goals. So you will see the word cooperative popping up a lot here. And then the other one is, or the last one is all kinds of new, for example, business models based on platforms, open innovation, crowdsourcing, and so on, that are aimed at scaling up solutions. And of course, what you can say is, well, these are archetypes, and so any business model could be a combination of all these 8 different elements, which is true. That could be one approach, but we think that more guidance can be given by looking at them in a more integrated way. And the way we did it is taking a more hierarchical way, as you can see here. And so rather than next to each other, we now present the same dimensions in a more hierarchical way, and we focus on one technological archetype, which is creating value from waste, because that's the one that in the Rustica project using biofertilizers we are focusing on. And so that kind of would say this is the planet aspect, the technological aspect. Here is where your ecological footprint is going to be improved. And then we have the social dimension, where there is a focus on functionality, on stewardship, or on sufficiency. And then the third layer is the organizational layer, where you have a repurposed model, more focused on social profit, or a scaled-up model, which is more focused on upscaling results, and which will be relatively more profit-oriented. Again, these are archetypes. So archetypes are ideal types. So I'll anticipate the conclusion. And of course, in reality, also at this level, and if we come up with 6 archetype business models for creating value from waste, in reality, again, it can be a hybrid of these 6 different models. So what does that mean in practice? Well, the other thing you find a lot about, I mean, everybody talks these days about business models, but most of the talk is about, is something profitable, and a cost-benefit analysis is done, maybe a net present value analysis is done, and that's the end of the story. But that's of course only one element of business models. Business models, and the paper I like most is a paper by Morris and colleagues that describes business models the best, I think, in 6 dimensions. Who do we create value? How do we create value? Who do we create value for? What is our source of competence? And how do we competitively position ourselves? How do we make money? So how's the value capture being done? That's a very important one, because Hans indicated that there is the implication for inequality. And I also previously I've criticized some of the innovations in the bioeconomy as being large scale and by definition therefore benefiting some but not every one, whether it's farmers or people in low-income countries. And the value capture is very important in order for inequality not to increase. And also, what are ambitions? What are time, scope, and size ambitions? Is the business model sufficient to generate a certain result, or is it the idea to upscale it? These are, of course, very different contexts to take into account. So let me try to apply that to some examples. So this is kind of exploring whether we can find examples in each of these archetypes. For example, if we focus on functionality, so this is more the leasing type of business models, whether it's purposeful or scaled up. So purposeful, so the definition is here that it's about providing services rather than owning products. And the difference between purposeful and scaled up is that the priority is given in a purposeful business model to social and environmental benefits. And so the economics is rather a constraint. Social and environmental benefits is the goal. Whereas in the functionality, it's a scaling up. Probably the economics will have more priority, and the social and the environmental benefits will be, of course, also important, but maybe has a bit less priority. And so an example of the first could be the case of Porto Amazonas in Brazil, where an organization is renting biodigesters to a municipality. And so that's sounds like a purposeful activity to enable citizens' houses, so at a relatively small scale, to deposit their organic waste and providing energy. And whereas a more scaled up example would be the Acqua and Sole example from Italy, that really wants to organize this at a more regional level, at the waste recycling and agriculture, and selling a service, which is waste collection, to their suppliers for a fee, offering the product to their customers for free. And so that's also a very specific but already scaled up business model. So in terms of, I'm not going to discuss everything in detail. If you plot that out against the different questions, how do we create value? Well, it's service-based, and the difference between purposeful and scaled up, for example, is that purposeful means that you are much more working in a relational way, whereas scaled up will probably be more transactional. And whereas you will have to apply a growth model, for example, to scale up, whereas subsistence or an income model will be sufficient. And so what kind of value and how much value is created is different in these two types of business model. And of course, all the other elements, of course, matter. So you can see here some of the the indicators that Calliope, the supply chain indicators, for example, service quality will be very important, and to be able to compete in the market. If you focus on a functionality approach, then service quality is extremely important, for example. Second one is stewardship. So here it's about it's more a stakeholder oriented. It's more focused on their well-being. And again, the difference between the two is prioritizing really the social benefits versus scaling up. And stewardship approaches, you often find corporations and cooperatives, like in Sweden and Germany, where you have cooperatives of farmers owning together a biogas digester. And I would say, well, the difference between the two is in Sweden, the aim is not really to generate revenues, but it's rather than being circular, whereas the second one, the idea is to also generate sufficient product to sell on a market, for example, in which you need a larger scale. And so that also influences, of course, the way you set up your business model. And then the last one is sufficiency based. Of course, sufficiency is something special because, well, biomass is something that is degrading, is being destroyed by definition. So this would focus more on having high quality durable products. It's a bit more difficult, I would say, to conceptualize this in terms of the bioeconomy. Now, for time's sake, I'm going to jump to the conclusion. So, of course, you can. This is what we're building up, is to see how these different business models function in these different under these different archetypes. But to conclude with some remarks. So, the idea is to find pathways towards more sustainable business model. Of course. We call them sustainable circular business model, but it doesn't mean that they're 100% sustainable or 100% circular. They may prioritize some goals, but not all goals. That's why it's important to have this holistic approach. Secondly, is sufficiency, which is a difficult concept to conceptualize in the bioeconomy. As I said before, a third remark. Is the fact that, of course, in reality, we will see hybrid forms of these archetypes, and the complexer the business, the more hybrid it will be, probably. And of course, these will also be relevant for other types of technologies. And we see, for example, in a publication by Huiben and Verbong, where they applied basically these three approaches to photovoltaic business models: a more customer-owned, a more community-based, and a third-party business model. Okay, I would like to leave it at that. Thank you for your attention, and I'd really like to invite you to follow our Twitter account and to visit our project of Rustica. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erik. That was again very. Oh, I have a big echo. Anyway. It's going, yeah, it's probably because your mic was still on. So yes, I would like to open the floor for the discussion. Our specific questions to the four speakers, or a general comment that you would like to bring up. So, or we can I can go through the questions that were in the chat. There were not too many questions, actually. I already saw a lively discussion going on about recycling streams that came out of the presentation of Hans. But maybe I could ask Flavio Scognamiglio to ask his this question about the role of the public sector to Katrien. Could you switch on your microphone and camera to ask your question? I hope he's still here. Okay. I have no access to the microphone, unfortunately. Okay, well, the question that he asked is whether how you see the role of the public sector in terms of being the enabler towards the transition to a bio-circular economy.
Thank you for that question. And yeah, of course, my profession, I'm a professor of public administration, so I'm very much interested in the role of the public sector. And I think they have an important role, but I presented the idea of the small wins and that you leverage your interventions on the propelling mechanisms. In general, it means that the government can use everything that's possible. It could be tax instruments, it could be legislation, sometimes it's bringing people together. So all the hard and soft instruments are possible to use, but most important is always to look if they really focus on small wins and help to accelerate and deepen them. So
Okay,
it's not so that it's only facilitating or only legislation. It really depends on in-depth analysis of the situation. For example, that was also referred to the Renewable Energy Directive of the EU. It has many perverse effects. So focus on what's happening and have in-depth analysis. Do not just open your suitcase with normal instruments.
Okay, do you think that the models that Hans and Erik and also Calliope actually were talking about would be useful to make an analysis of that?
Yes.
Or maybe one of the others that could comment on how they see whether that would be possible?
Yeah. Now I see the final presentation of Erik Mathias with the archetypes of business models. I think that can be very helpful to connect with the small wins perspective and to design possible interventions.
Okay, Erik, how do you see that?
No, I agree. I was thinking. So sorry, Katrina. I referred to Calliope and I referred to Hans, but I didn't refer to you. But that would be my reference indeed. That is that. I mean, a cooperative model could be a very good model, but maybe there is already a cooperative. So that would be a small win for that cooperative to move into. Whereas in a situation where I'm thinking, for example, in Eastern Europe, that would not be a small win, is to build a cooperative, because there's a culture which is anti-cooperative, for example. So of course this is very contextual and very. I mean, something that I missed out in the presentation is how much importance there is in the context, in the socio-cultural and economic context. That, I mean, and you could also look at these archetypes in these different contexts. How does this work in Spain? How does this work in the Netherlands, in Poland, etc. Which is also what we will do in Rustica, by the way.
And to add to that, to look what's already there. Yeah.
It was also the same from my side when we're talking about focusing the assessment with co-creation and trying to focus on specific challenges with the different groups. Definitely the policymakers and the public sector is there, because they are the ones that are handling and doing all the implementation of the policies, and also the monitoring, the effective monitoring. So it's very important.
Okay, thank you. I also had a question myself to Calliope. Is how could we approach to make the Green Deal bioeconomy strategy and the SDGs more coherent? Because you said that was necessary.
Yeah, it depends on the different layers. I think it's mostly on pairing, first of all, different angles of the Green Deal through the policies, through the initiatives, through the actors. We talked about the public sector, and pair the topics and the indicators and see if there's coherence, because if the Green Deal is measuring in a different way and the SDGs have certain typology of indicators that they pursue for the specific issues that affect bioeconomy or bio-based solutions and value chains, then there's an inconsistency. So the first thing is to pair them and see whether where they cross-reference and then try and analyze based on the different value chains and the prospects you would like to see them achieving.
Yeah, who would you think should take the lead for that?
I think it's a global, it needs to be a global initiative with the EU hand in hand. I mean, it can't work only from, but of course the European Union has already started quite dynamic procedures. So they can always make the start.
Okay, thank you.
But inviting the table, inviting the table other nations that do the same. I mean, bring along different people from Asia, from Latin America, from the US, from Canada, all the global initiatives, and have a discussion on how they can align priorities. They've done it before. There's the Mission Impossible. There are different mission innovation things. So yeah, I said Mission Impossible. No, it was Mission Innovation. It shouldn't be impossible.
No, I hope not. Well, maybe we can think about a workshop on our conference for something like this.
On planning the initiatives, yeah. And we could think of bringing the mission innovation people that have been working across some of the themes that are within the Green Deal. So yeah, I'll take a note and we can discuss that.
We can discuss later. There was one more question that came in from Fulvio, also for Katrien. Should the local public actor aim at an institutionalization of the small win strategy or not?
I'm not sure if I understand the question right. It's about institutionalizing the strategy or the small wins. And regarding institutionalizing small wins, then there is always a risk involved in it. Don't institutionalize them too early, because sometimes they are too much end of the pipeline solutions. So, and before you know, you risk to enter a new lock-in and path dependency. So therefore also the small wins, make a next step and see and observe what happens. But if he refers to institutionalizing the approach, then I would support that. And also because many times I observe that also governmental organizations, they are very ambitious, so they develop ambitious policy plans, what things all need to happen, but there's always the risk that they overlook what's already happening, so that they, with doing that, disregard initiatives that are already ongoing, but they don't support it, and then they will disappear. For example, the Netherlands, we already had some cooperatives, but then the ministry, they developed a plan that we need cooperatives all over the country. So that's, then you organize competition. That's not always helpful.
Yes, indeed. Okay. Are there any more questions from anyone? Because I think that all the questions that were in the chat were already answered. Or
I have a Saskia.
Yes, go ahead.
My mic was not working on an earlier question of you, because I think also Katrien said some of the macroeconomic tools, we try to get the big picture, because if you go to especially the transition path, often you end up with what Eric and Calliope and so on. And I think also in the Green Deal, it's uncertain, and it's really the specific implementation is very important, but also the reaction of other countries. because it's already now some critics coming up that the Green Deal might be bad for developing countries and food security. But it really depends on what kind of trade policies there will be at the end, because some people talk about tariffs at the border that get the competitive position equal. But that might also be worse, of course, for some developing countries. But it's also depending if Europe goes green alone or together. So, and it's quite a lot of the impacts will be very depending on whether we go together or alone in Europe, and then really depending on how the trade measures will be implemented. You can see the big debate we had with Brexit. It matters in the details, but it's a big difference, and this will also be the case for the future. So depending, and this will also make how competitive bio-based more green in Europe will be on the world market relative to others. So so the institutional, the government setup is quite important. Actually, I had a question. I'm not sure for Erik or maybe also for the others. When I was thinking about if you have a business model, but from a little bit. I think one of the key problems, one issue is the financial markets, and that owners are stockholders, and stockholders are interested in profits, and therefore you see that at some point a lot of the profits and gains are going to capital, and because it's going to capital, we get a more unequal income distribution and so on and so on. Would be ownership by the employees or by the, for example, by the people who work in the neighborhood or work in the factory, could change also the objectives of firms, because now you see the big money is short term, it's oriented at profits, and it's favorable for people who have capital. And I think something has to change. At least my perception is that we might have also to look at the working at financial markets. Maybe you have in your business models, you might also think about these kind of issues, that people who have a different aims should have different financial structures or something. But it's puzzling in my head. But maybe you have a clear view on that.
Yeah, can I answer? Yeah. I think energy cooperatives are a clear, well, somebody's also putting it in the chat. Energy cooperatives, where citizens-based energy cooperatives are a nice example of what you just said, Hans. I think so. Yes, of course, that kind of I mean, that should be part of the value capture idea. What I mentioned before, but I think also another thing that I think. Is kind of missing, and I'm bouncing back the question to you and also to the others, and that is, for example, we do have a carbon market. Yeah, Rabobank announced yesterday that they will be a carbon bank, right? So so that means that small farmers can actually make money out of some of their practices, but we have that for carbon, but we don't have that for many of the other elements or nutrients. So, I mean, policy, or as economists, we think maybe also, I mean, it's, so do you have an idea? Can we also organize other aspects of the bioeconomy in such a way? Because it's going to boom. Huh? This is an important thing in the Green Deal. It's to increase these carbon markets and also to salt sequestration. So that would also be a financial market implication, because financial markets, and I mentioned Rabobank, are more and more interested also in these markets.
Any more comments towards that?
Yeah, no, I think I agree with Erik that this is a key issue, and I think it's maybe most easiest for this carbon dioxide market, because it's a global thing. It's quite, but for other things, I was thinking it might be more difficult, because then you're thinking about biodiversity and all these kind of issues that it's more local. It's might be Yeah, I don't know exactly. Maybe some of the others can fill in that part.
Well, I'm thinking about, supermarket chains that, for example, increasingly operate in this through their specifications that they put on farmers. Yeah. So these are not offsetting schemes, but insetting schemes. And big multinationals are increasingly also interested in these mechanisms. And that's not only carbon, that's also there you can include, I would say, also local impact, I would say.
Okay. Katrien, you're muted.
And the risk of a carbon market only is that all actors focus on optimizing their carbon market, what will result in many negative side effects. And how adaptive are we then?
Yeah, I see again a question popping up that you would like to answer at least partially at our conference. So please think about this. Maybe
because that's also to refer to one of my first slides, that we do not know how the circular bioeconomy will look like, and because we don't know the final picture yet, then we need adaptive and learning strategies.
Yes, and
if we would know the solutions, then we would also need other strategies. But because we don't know the final picture yet, that's the reason that we need those complex governing strategies, so to say.
Yeah, but it's good to have a vision on how you think it should be.
Yes, but the vision is not the same as a master plan.
For sure, of course. Okay. Are there any more questions from anybody in the audience or one of the speakers? If not, then I'm going to close the webinar. I will just end with showing you this this slide once again that you already saw before, or presented by Saskia Visser. So the call for sessions is now open. Please submit any ideas that you have for a scientific session, a workshop, or a masterclass to the Circular WUR email address. And then we will notify you by the 15th of, by the 31st of March, whether it's accepted or not. Or maybe we'll have some, if similar ideas come in, we may ask you to merge with somebody else. So please remember the deadline is the 1st of March for submitting your abstracts. I would like to thank all of the speakers for their very good presentations and all the attendees for their attention and interesting questions. So hope to see you all in December in Wageningen.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Gaat goed.
Okay.